big shout out to all of you, to Sinclair for having me, to Reverend Wilson for that wonderful opening invocation. It's an honor to be here. My name is Jared Ball. Professionally, well, more importantly, I'm a father and a husband. Professionally, I'm a professor of Africana and Media Studies at Morgan State University. All due respect to Howard and all other HBCUs, you know. A little bit on enemy territory here as usual, but it's all good. I was born here in Washington, D.C., and I grew up where I now live out in Howard County, Columbia, Maryland. And for most of my adult life, going on 30 years now, I've been involved in any number of grassroots organizational and media efforts in support of Black and African diaspora people liberating themselves. So it's an honor to get to join you, especially since I am coming from a very different perspective than I think most here have, but I appreciate the ability to engage, and Sinclair's wonderful repeated invitations have been very well, again, appreciated, and I'm grateful. But first, before I even say anything else, I just want to start off by saying something, and then something I want to come back to. I would like everybody just to take a quick moment and focus for a quick second on how little time in your life has been dedicated to any form of institutional instruction around capitalism as an economic and social system. This is not to say that you don't know anything. This is not to disparage. This is not to suggest that you are ignorant. But I want to recognize that for the most part, most of us, whatever understanding we've come to around how capitalism works, and particularly how it engages Black people and African people, has come from some autodidact, independent self-study in collectives outside of institutions. Very little of it comes from universities, schools, religious institutions, anywhere. So I just wanted to quickly start there. And a point that I'll come back to. There's another element of this that I also want to start off with as an introductory sort of comment. Just for clarity, as I said, my background is in Africana and Media Studies. I'm not a trained economist. On some level, it could be argued this is a benefit in terms of to understanding how the economy actually works. But I just want to be clear that my perspective is not so much coming from, again, an institutional study of economics, capitalism or otherwise, but it is particularly, that is my focus, my approach to this comes from a focus on the study of African people and media and how they interact, and then in particular as it relates to economics, narratives around economics. So that's become sort of my primary focus of my work in the last, I don't know how many years, but that, again, the overlap of the realities of the material conditions versus the narrative gaps that are developed, or rather I should say imposed to aid the project and foster more confusion. So my approach is not, again, as that of an economist. I'm not one. Mine is born out of Africana and Media Studies, and specifically the intersection of colonization and its projection, its mediation via propaganda and psychological warfare. If there's any fortune or serendipity here, is that in my particular path to get here, that is to this space and to my conclusions, it happens to situate me nicely to understand just how narratives around the economy are developed, how they ended up being misunderstood, and their importance in explaining the unexplainable, and how they are meant to mask the realities of how the economy works. So for instance, if you just take that basic graph and you start that at the bottom that shows the real wages paid to all laborers in this country over the last 50 years, all right, regardless of race. You just take the real wages paid to working people in this country, it stays flat. If you take a look at the productivity and the wealth developed in that same 50, 60-year period, it goes up like this, and you end up with something that looks like this. Now, how do you cover the gap here? How do you, particularly if you're benefiting from that to the tune of the 700 or so people Fortune magazine or Forbes magazine said recently are worth $5.5 trillion, or the 0.1% globally that Oxfam consistently says control the wealth of the planet. Now, how do you reconcile that? You're benefiting, but at the same time, all the people producing that wealth at the bottom are not. So what do you do? Well, two things from my research or my particular approach to this have become very clear. One, you give everybody credit. That's why the average American has about $6,000 in credit card debt. That's why globally at the national level, you have World Bank and IMF loans, all meant to manipulate the public policy of those individual countries, assuring that previous colonial relationships maintain themselves in new forms in the modern era. It allows people to spend, and again, generating the wealth, driving the economy, producing wealth for those who own the economy, producing the illusion of participating in the economy for those at the bottom, reducing the likelihood that they will raise certain questions about why are we getting credit cards instead of better pay? Why am I going into debt to buy the same things I should have been able to buy with my regular salary 50 years ago? To prevent that, give them to that. The other thing is just a massive amount of psychological warfare or propaganda, which is often euphemized in terms of words like public relations, branding, marketing, advertising, social media, entertainment. All of them are euphemisms for psychological warfare and the role that media is meant to play in the process of defending empire and colonization. And it's in that gap that we end up with a lot of the narratives that end up negatively impacting most of us in this room. So first, as I mentioned, there's the broader context of empire and the United States as itself a settler colony, and then becoming the singular empire after World War II, and the establishment and codification within this country of anti-democratic means of control. And this is something we can come back to during Q&A discussion. But after the Second World War, when the United States becomes a singular empire and dominant force in the world, one of the main projects it engaged in was developing one of the fields that I happen to be degreed in, mass communication research, the primary goal of which was to learn how to manipulate public opinion. How do you wed concepts? This was the work of Ivy Lee and Edward Bernays and others. How do you wed the concepts of capitalism and democracy? These are not terms that really should be linked together at all. This is a very anti-democratic country. This is an anti-democratic process. Capitalism is in itself, as I'll come to in a moment, anti-democratic. In fact, the economist Richard Wolff points out that given that most of us, that is 97% of people in this country, are workers and only 3% are owners or employers, that relationship should be understood as what governs this society. That is an undemocratic relationship that most of us are in. So the idea that we're somehow in some free democratic society while most of us are spending times in very undemocratic institutions is part of what should expose the illusion here. Propaganda and psychological warfare were developed, again, over the last 50 or 60 years in a way that prefaces what Malcolm X would eventually say himself, that the US had perfected the science of image making. And by today, we are subsumed within the most sophisticated, penetrative, and all-pervasive media environment, propaganda, psychological warfare environment ever produced by humanity. And it's something that most of us are under-attendant to. We're encouraged not to recognize that and not to focus on it. So there is that broader context of empire that sets the governing relationships between the state, that is this country, and indigenous people, the enslaved, and even broader the laboring class, white workers, and everybody else all together. That is, it sets this hostile relationship based on extraction, exploitation, hostility. So what is a capitalist? Simply put, one who subscribes to the idea of private accumulation of collectively generated wealth and the attendant worldview that justifies the idea. A capitalist is one who subscribes to the idea of private accumulation of the collectively generated wealth and the attendant worldview that justifies the idea. And I want to stress that again. The wealth that is generated in this country, the 20 trillion plus GDP of this country, the 150, I believe, trillion in private personal wealth in this country generated every year, the 450 trillion in private personal wealth generated globally every year, is generated by all of us. When we go to work, when we pay our bills, when we pay taxes, when we transact through investment, when we shop, whatever we're doing, we are generating that wealth. We just don't benefit from it. Now, I am a socialist. Again, just putting the cards on the table. And what does that mean? That is, I am one who subscribes to the idea of democratic control over the wealth collectively generated by society and the attendant worldview that justifies the idea. That is, as a socialist, I am one who subscribes to the idea of democratic control over the wealth collectively generated by society and the attendant worldview that justifies the idea. Now, the reason I keep pointing to collective wealth, because again, we all are generating that wealth. The reason I keep pointing in both definitions to the point of worldview and ideas is that I'm acknowledging I am operating off of a set of ideas that justify my final claim. What I'm encouraging is that those who disagree and who are themselves capitalists or want to perceive themselves to be, recognize that they too are operating off of a worldview that has a set of ideas that justify their conclusion. Then for me, the question becomes, well, how did we get those ideas and where did those ideas come from? In other words, as a former professor of mine, I always give him credit without necessarily naming him. We did not have the greatest relationship when I was a student, but the point is he always says something that stuck with me: interrogate your preferences. I always simplify it by saying, how do you know what you know and why do you like what you like? You don't have to, I'm not, much like we heard from Brother Sinclair, I'm not trying here, well, I'm lying. I would love to convert all of you to revolutionaries. let me stop fronting. Let me just stop fronting. I am here to propagandize you, to turn you into revolutionaries within a 30 to 40 minute period, all right? I just want to, again, put the cards on the table so you know where I'm coming from. You can put up your defenses, take everything with a grain of salt, because ultimately I don't want you to take my word for any of this. I double dare you to do the research to see if you can disprove my claims here this morning. I triple dare you. So I want to be upfront. I should have said it. Usually I start off with that and I'm sooner to it. But yes, I do want. But that point aside, I do at least want you to recognize that you don't have to change your worldview. Just I encourage you to become more critical of how you reached it. Especially given the world we're in today, where again, as I keep somewhat jokingly, but I really believe it, we're in a civilizational crisis of methodology. That is, how people are reaching their conclusions is more disturbed and confused today than maybe ever, or it's easily more manipulated today more than ever. And a lot of people are running around with unstudied, unexperienced, undata supported conclusions, and it's terrifying in some ways. Okay. To accept any economic order, in this country's case, it's described as some form of capitalism. To accept any economic order is to accept a set of ideas, a worldview, narratives that justify the outcomes. In this country's case, those outcomes include wild inequality, hostility, constant warfare, that has been demonstrated empirically over many years to be a predictable outcome of this exact socio-economic model. So in other words, it is not an accident, it is not confusing to those who study or to those in power that we end up with these kinds of wild inequality, and hostile, violent outcomes. Black wealth in this country is headed to zero. Black wealth related to whites is still 15 cents on the dollar. More police are killing more black people and others in this country year after year. More people are being put under various forms of surveillance. More political prisoners either remain in prison, let out just in time to die, or are being created as people start to learn new forms of resistance and struggle against all this wild inequality. The joblessness, the lack of health care, again, the ongoing conflicts with police, military, just general anti-blackness is creating what others have already pointed out is a level of stress that equates for black people just living in the United States to people fighting on the front lines in a war. More specifically, oh, by the way, I just learned this the other day when I mentioned that point about credit cards. I forgot to add this part. The original use of the word credit card was from a socialist in, I believe, a 19th century play or novel. And the point of the use of the credit card was the way for working people in a society or people in a society to spend their portion of the wealth they created. It was not meant to put them into debt. It was just a card that allowed them to say, look, you're a citizen of this country, we've created this much wealth, you participated in this, this is your balance. It has become obviously turned into something that causes debt, causes instability. Sure.
So was that a form of bartering? The credit, what you just
No, I wouldn't, no. The credit card initially, no, in its original socialist sense wasn't a form of bartering. It was just a mechanism. It was like, it was instead of saying, here is $1,000 in cash, here's your credit card representing that, just like it is, but this is not a debt to you. This is your piece of the pie you helped create as a member of this society. So it was just understood as a way to help you, or to help a citizen manage what was their allotment. But, huh?
a distributed surplus.
A distributed surplus. It's always whack when people say something better from the back of the room. I don't know why, and then they just show up to kind of troll you like that, like I got it better than you. No, I'm just playing. No, I appreciate it. No, that's it. The surplus is created, and that's actually a very good point. Capitalism, socialism all produce a surplus. In capitalism, that surplus goes to a tiny handful. That's 737 people worth $5 trillion. They get that. In a socialist economy, it would be distributed differently, democratically. And that would be the surplus that you would get. Again, it would not be a debt as it is with the credit card now. Again, this inequality is planned. So for all of the commentary that we often get narratively about communism and socialism are planned economies, and we live in a quote unquote free market economy, that's mythology. The inequality in this country is a planned outcome. It is only labeled as being free in the same way someone might replace labels on cigarette packages to read, these are now not only safe for consumption, these are a must for a healthy lifestyle. And it is public policy that determines the legality of that social structure and that making capitalism function. So in other words, it's laws and policy that say anything from what the currency is, how that currency is valued, how wealth is created, how wealth is defined, who gets what. All of that is determined as a matter of public policy. It's just usually masked from us, and then the narratives, as I'm going to come to, are distilled to us as if you're poor, it's because you're lazy, only people who work hard achieve, everybody has free opportunity and access, a level playing field, so on and so on and so on. So as I said, as Richard Wolff points out, 97% of the population are employees, laborers, and yet we operate off of the logic of the 3% who rather off of the 3% who are our employers rather than off of our own logic, that is those of the working people. So we are often determining our decisions and behaviors and interpretations on the logic of those who benefit from this level of exploitation and inequality rather than from our own, as a socialist might put it, class interests. Now, as all of this relates to the issue of technology, we see a similar process at play. While we can observe and demonstrate just how technology is both, as Huey Newton and others have pointed out, a byproduct of exploitation or an evolution out of exploitation of working people, land, labor, et cetera, and so forth, it is then used to further enhance that exploitation and to ensconce and codify social relationships. Technology has always been an aid to power, not what would undermine or overthrow it. In communications, I talk about it all the time, one of my favorite arguments has come from an old argument from Harold Innis, The Bias of Communication. And the core argument there is that all communication technology historically has done is allow for an accumulation of power and the maintenance of power over expanding societies. The ability to have your language dominate the written word, to have your views dominate the early and most printed books and literature, to have your ability to dominate later inventions like radio or the telegraph. One of my favorite essays is by Herbert Schiller that talks about the expansion of the telegraph across the west coast of this country was part and parcel of expanding both the post office and the military. It was a military operation to expand the communicative networks. Anybody been in the military or pays attention to military strategy always knows one of the first things you have to do is establish communication. You got to get your communications right. If you can't communicate, everything starts to fall down. And if your communication is interrupted or if the messaging is disturbed, your operation is never going to succeed. So we have to always understand that, especially communicative, but all really technology is an emissary of the political will of that society, and in this country's case, that's warfare. You can't find, I think, more than a 10-year period in this country's history where they have not been using their military to suppress, eliminate, genocide, enslave, bomb, drone. It's almost, I don't think you can, I don't think there's even a 10-year period in this country's history where that's not been going on. And it was a sad joke at the time, but as soon as Biden announced that he was pulling out of Afghanistan, I started asking immediately, so where's the next one going to be? Because as they reported, that's $300 million a day being spent for 20 years on a war in Afghanistan. So that's $300 million going to somebody every day. And that somebody was asking, you think you're just going to turn off the faucet like that? Word? Really? No, you need to find us another conflict to get into, and then boom, 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 here's Ukraine. And you got and now you got Israel buying $20 billion and more weapons from Kamala just last week, or 2 weeks ago. So they got to, and actually, I mean, this is part of the problem. If you understand or study capital, that is what Marx called the original sin of a capitalist society, that is the reduction of anything and everything to a commodity that which can be bought, sold, or traded, then you learn quickly that you have to constantly keep it moving. You can't tell people, which is often, again, I'll come back to this in a moment, you can't tell people, poor people, particularly black people, to hold on and save your money or circulate it within your own community and expect that to turn into wealth. That's not how wealth is. That's anti-capitalism. That's anti-capital. Capital needs to expand. It needs to get out there into the world and come back and go back again and keep moving. As soon as it stops in somebody's savings account or within some sort of poor colonized community, it dwindles. You could just start to picture little old capital. Ooh, let me out. Run me into the world. You've got me in this little hamster wheel of a black community. There's not circulation. I need to run in the wilderness and the farmlands of global empire. Yes. Go ahead. It doesn't. So that's part of the mythology. This idea that Jews and Asians and everybody else circulates their dollar and that's why they're rich is complete fantasy. Absolutely does not happen. To the extent that any of those communities have any wealth or business or collectivity, it is because they are, we're talking about small segments of those populations. We're talking about how they're supported by public policy, often emanating from the federal government of both this country and their home countries. We're talking about a situation where the people who we see in those stores are the same exact people working day in and day out. And the idea that they're somehow generating this tremendous amount of wealth off of their poor black customer base is part of the mythology that I've been wanting to help expose for some time now. And as I'll come back to, it has been exposed. This is part of the problem that people like me run into. Like these debates have been had and settled already. They just keep coming back because, well, revolution is a process. I mean, everything So those communities are not doing that. I just, you know.
But the Korean community in that whole chain does separate back into the community
But you're talking, so you're talking about the Korean businesses. Again, we're talking about a handful of businesses doing a handful of wealth creation, satisfying only a handful. The idea that a broad diaspora Korean population is thriving off of hair care and Presbyterian churches is part of the mythology here. The extent that they've been able to do what they've been able to do has been because of relationships. First of all, so it hasn't been successful. And to the extent they've been able to do what they've been able to do, that is the result of relationships with Korean government officials, US officials, public policy. And the idea that it is benefiting everybody in their broader community is part of the mythology here. So again, even in a white supremacist, white-dominated country like this one, capitalism doesn't even hook them all up. I mean, if look at the white population in this country, there is a tremendous amount of poverty and inequality in those communities, and they got this is their settler colony. So there's still only one Amazon and one Walmart for the white folks. So the idea that black people and what wealth does that create for white folks? Relatively speaking, very little. Relative to us, everything looks good. Relative to the enslaved, that's why Marx wrote that letter to Lincoln after he nominally freed the slaves. He said, you freed the white workers in Europe. They don't have to compete now against an unpaid labor force. So now that you got to pay them Africans, you definitely going to have to pay the white workers. Because even, again, it's become an increasingly funny joke to me, you know, at least in my mind, that Marx, this grand, most known critic of capitalism, was a white man writing about white Europe, about white workers in white condition. He as is often criticized, didn't really fully appreciate the colonized racial experience of the non-white world. But even in the white world, he was like, this don't work. And yet somehow, here we are in 2024, and almost it feels more than ever, black people are being told, no, but it'll work for you if you just do it this way. And that's part of, but again, please don't take my word for it. Please expand whatever it is we all think we know about the conditions of these communities. This glorious utopia the Koreans and Jews and East Indians are living in. I think it's not what we are often thought it is. Yeah, go ahead. We'll just work the Q&A in now. It don't matter. Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, whatever.
I'm in real estate, so I work with a lot of investors, public, private, whatever, companies and stuff like that. A lot of people that I do work with, they leverage debt. And I think one main thing about it is it comes down to education. So if you have the education to be able to, going back to public policy of how capitalism is structured and stuff like that, if you have the education on how to move within the economy and how to create wealth, then it can be done.
So now you're talking about financial literacy, and that's a point I wanted to get to. Financial literacy is part of the mythology here. So poor people are not poor because they lack education and don't understand how the economy works. This is part of, so, a colleague of mine who is working on her doctorate now, Erica Brown, she just published her first essay in Yes Magazine called The False Prophets of Profit, talking about the media environment and the false claims being made by a lot of black pundits and popular podcasts about just this topic. Her work on financial literacy, which I've had the privilege of because I work with her a little bit, having gotten to see, and in fact, as I'm talking right now live, I have to finish reviewing one of her papers for her chair. Today, is due today. So as soon as I leave here, I gotta go finish reading this paper, but it's about financial literacy. And financial literacy, which is itself connected to traditions of colonization. Literacy by itself was used in the conquering of indigenous and enslaved African people in this country, and in this continent, I should say, and indigenous people with this claim that, oh, they're just not literate. If they know how to speak our language and read our signs and symbols, they can succeed in this society. But that's part of the mythology and used to justify the colonization in the first place. So again, poor people, black or otherwise, are not poor because they do not understand how the economy works. They are poor because capitalism requires it. You cannot, I mean, overly simplifying it, you cannot have rich without poor. I used to joke all the time when I used to go to the club, you can't have a VIP unless you have a regular part of the club. And one of my favorite, we were trying to celebrate a birthday party in probably a club around here that got shut down some years ago, as or moved or whatever it was. But I was trying to celebrate a birthday party. We get a little VIP rope, and then the woman realizes that the VIP section wasn't for me and my crew. We had kind of just slid in on somebody else's. And when she realized that, and she realized the real VIP people weren't showing up, and we had just sort of slid into that, all she did was lift the rope. And we were all just in the club. And our little illusion of VIP was gone. I was like, put the rope back so I could have my illusion. Now we're all in the same room, same air, listening to the same music, getting the same relative drink service, all of it's the same, but that rope. So all right, so financial literacy and soon to be future Dr. Brown has identified almost the singular source for this. There's a very popular academic in economic circles working right out of this city who has made her entire career promoting this idea that if nation states promote financial literacy to their poor as a way of teaching the poor how to become unpoor, they can protect themselves from the criticism of creating the public policy that creates the poor people in the first place. So we say, what did we, Kamala Harris said it the other night, we hear it all, that after George Floyd was killed, the corporate world put in $50 billion into the black community, as it was said, but where did it all go? Nonprofits, small business startups, financial literacy courses, all because everybody understands this is a hustle that's been going on in terms of black people for 100 and some years. Andrew Brimmer, and before him, the Negro is capitalist. I do this all the time. Somebody tell me who I'm trying to remember here. Abram Harris. Abram Harris was writing in the 30s and said, this is some fugazi, this is nonsense. This buy black, don't buy where you can't work, support, all it does is create a black bourgeoisie, their black elite that benefits off the poverty of their own community. He actually said the black business community was worse than anybody in terms of exploiting their own people. I still think he went a little too far with that one, but his point is still, the point being, this idea that we can take poor people and teach them, oh, you just need to know how to flip a stock or flip a house or balance a checkbook, or do you know what a CD is? As if this is why people are poor. This is not why people are poor. People are poor because they're underpaid, they're overworked, they're forced into debt, et cetera, and so forth. And then they're told, just become financially literate. That is well, I'll just skip to this part now. After the Second World War, the business community in this country had a major crisis. And its crisis was, how do we get everybody in this country back onto the idea of private corporate dominance of the economy? Because what they had seen is during the Second World War, when this country had to refashion everything to produce weapons and all this other stuff and send all these young men off to die in the fields and all that, they said, we got to have programs to bring women into the workforce. We got to have immigrants in the workforce. We got to have unskilled and underemployed people in other areas, bring them into the workforce. We got to, in other words, the government got involved and they told corporations, you got to set prices. You can't price gouge. We just saw that issue come up again. They said the government said you can't do that because we're at war. But after the war, the business community was like, all right. And Elizabeth Franz Wolf, in this book I keep talking about, Selling Free Enterprise, she goes through this history and she shows how in 1930s, before the Second World War, there was already an expanding labor movement that was getting people to think that we were about to have a society where there was a 25-hour work week, multiple weeks and months of paid vacation, and all kinds of stuff. That's 100 years ago. Do any of you know anybody, maybe you're fortunate, anybody know anybody that works 25-hour work weeks and is sustaining themselves? Maybe somebody's chilling, they don't want to raise that, I don't know. Most working people is way past 40, and 40 was the bargain that the labor movement got, half a century later. Where we are today, many working people 60, 80 hours a week just to make ends meet and don't have those paid vacations, don't have that universal health care, don't have all of these things that we see other parts of the world having. So what was done was there was a massive propaganda campaign that the business community led, long story short, to convince everybody, let's get back on this free enterprise thing, let's get government back out of the thing, let's get everybody back on business development. And then in the black community, this was targeted specifically. You had John H. Johnson promoting the Selling the Negro documentary so that you could have a black commercial media class, attracting ad revenue from white corporations while promoting to those corporations that black people just want to be good citizens who go shopping and do a middle class life. You had, and that's become a major problem to this day, the involvement of a black commercial press that promotes itself as representing the interests of black people, but is limited by its obeisance to white corporate ad revenue. It limits the range of discussion you can have, and one of those limits ends at financial literacy. In other words, there's never going to be a left discussion in most commercial black media spaces that goes into, let's argue about public policy that redistributes outcomes and stops mythologizing opportunity. You're never going to get that. Pepsi, McDonald's, Toyota, Exxon, they don't want to sponsor that kind of conversation. So this is something that goes back, again, at least 100 years. This is something that we heard Reverend Wilson mention him. This is something that Booker T. Washington, the Negro Business League that he helped create, that they were pushing from the turn of the century, that they, in a benefit and partnership with white corporate business, state sponsorship, etc., because it has been a long project of this country to turn black liberation into black capitalist endeavor. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
And more. If you go back to Catholicism, which led into
But, okay, let me clarify something. I think there's some confusion around the word literacy here. Literacy in the phrase financial literacy doesn't mean literate in terms of language and speaking. It means recognizing the signs and symbols of that particular concept or field. And it's meant, particularly in the phrase financial literacy, it's meant as a way to teach people not to be critical of their final conclusion, or their final outcome. Well, you could say you're saying what I'm saying is subjective. On some level, well, it's objective in the sense that when you look at the way financial literacy is deployed and the arguments being made around it.
But the terminology, the terms, there's an entire dictionary of financial terms. I study finance.
Right.
I study economics.
Right. Every field has a lexicon where you have terms that are specific to that field that are applied for those specific purposes.
And that's literature.
I understand that, but the phrase financial literacy, as it's popularly used and deployed, particularly.
Well, you're talking about popularity. I'm talking about productive language, not interpretive language.
Right, but I'm talking to the people who but the black communities who are told to become financially literate are not being invited to learn the inner workings of this
Let's teach them. Let's talk the real stuff.
That's what I'm doing here. So real financial literacy is understanding how capitalism works and exploits workers and teaches them to develop revolutionary consciousness to change that relationship. That's financial literacy. That's my subjective definition of financial literacy. But again, the way it's popularly deployed and popularly understood, it's used as a mechanism to convince poor people that they can undo their poverty if they're just better at balancing their checkbook, saving their money, spending wisely, investing properly, and so on and so forth. But that does not teach someone to become literate in the way you're using the word in how the economy or capitalism works. So I'm trying to point out, as I said, I'm pointing at the narrative development, the use of propaganda and messaging. So I get it. Experts in the field are definitely going to understand the nomenclature differently. But the popular dissemination of the phrase has a very specific politic to it. And if you look at, for instance, Professor Lusardi, who works right out of, I believe, GW, has a global reach. Or is it Lusardo? I have to double check that. Has a global reach with her work. And its reach is it has an impact that trickles down in ways that I'm still learning because I happen to be in proximity to future Professor Brown's work. But the point is, what is becoming even more clear than I had ever been is that this is being used and being welcomed in to national projects around the world because it's being used to tell poor people everywhere, don't have movements, don't have revolutions, don't get upset, don't look outward. It is you who is.
That's how you cultivate an ecosystem, by doing what you're doing. Subjective truths and misinformation. Not saying you're giving misinformation, but misinformation and disinformation instead of teaching people and explaining what perfect information is.
I have a question. Are you saying they understood finance better? Are you saying that they understood finance better, like they took the class, that they would be able to overcome?
No.
Or to participate in?
Just literate in any culture.
What do you
Well,
mean?
that's the myth, is that people are illiterate in their own culture. That's the myth.
Not just
That's the
finance.
myth. The myth
Oh,
is
you're saying it's
financial
illiterate.
literacy. You go to somebody and you say, you're not literate in the means of production of your life. How do you, in the context of taking it from you?
Context.
That's the myth.
Interpretive
The
language.
myth is that the person that is being subjected to that is not literate. That's the.
All right, I tell you what, if I could just take maybe 5 to 10 more minutes to finish up what I was going to say, then we can fully engage a Q&A, because I think I don't want to get lost in this disagreement.
Okay, Brian, continue.
All right, so All right, as this relates to, I was trying to talk a little bit about technology. Technology is born out of the exploitation and the surplus that's developed through that exploitation and then used to re-exploit those same people. In media, where the field I'm more familiar with, it is, particularly as it relates to African people in the diaspora, it becomes very clear that media become part of a suppressive element. It becomes clear that there is a long desired interest among those in power to disturb the messages, symbols, histories, as Du Bois called it, the propaganda of history as it relates to black people, to convince black people that they are deserving of whatever condition they find themselves in. All technology has done, you know, I used to quote all the time, J. Rue had that line back in the day, the same chip that powered nuclear bombs powers my Sega. The toys, as Bruce Cosby once wrote, the gadgets of technology is what we're often given to play with. We're given the laptops, the social media, the phones, the whatever, but the technology that drives that, the inner workings of that technology is driven by a technology that is being used for any number of other purposes, particularly full spectrum dominance, as they like to call it, surveillance, targeted assassination. All of it has a military application, including the internet, which is itself originates in the military with a military purpose, specifically to expand the military, communicative, and surveillance capabilities of the state against targeted populations. At one point, as Yasha Levine writes in Surveillance Valley, taking the very colonial warfare being fought in the jungles of Korea and Vietnam and taking that wisdom, quote unquote, back to the United States and applying it against black and brown people here. Certainly, if you look at the history of radio, television, and film, the communicative, propagandistic ability of those media, particularly when we look at their impact on black communities, has always been hostile. Pop culture in this country is itself originates in white versions of blackness being used to perform a version of blackness that appeases white folks and white affluent audiences. That concept and that relationship and pattern still exists to this day, even more so, and yet is more difficult to identify. When we look at the specifics of what many of you are gathered here today to discuss, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, the same technological mythologies have been promoted and advanced here. Freedom, equality, level playing fields, and when we look behind the scenes, we see the same levels of accumulation and consolidation of both Bitcoin and Bitcoin wallets, consolidation over platforms and exchanges, consolidation over ownership of even the dominant blockchain tech companies. And then we see an increasing investment, not only from the original billionaire founders of it, but increasing investment in cryptocurrency and blockchain from all the major venture capitalists and private equity groups and banks. Meaning that technology, yet again, new, potentially exciting technology is yet again only reaffirming the pre-existing social relationships. The rich in this case get richer, the poor stay largely the same, and as we've seen data show that I've talked about previously, the impact on black people involved in these spaces has been disastrous. All right, so I'll wrap up here and then we can get into a Q&A by just repeating or sort of re-summarizing a few key points quickly. The economic outcomes of society are planned, predictable, and the result of intentional public policy. Or as the late, great Derek Bell said, if you look at how public policy relates to black people in this country, it equates to taking hundreds of black people out to secluded places and shooting them every week. So if we look at the way public policy redistributes wealth and healthcare and jobs out of the black community, and the negative impact on black health, physical, emotional, spiritual, and otherwise, it's the impact that Derek Bell described. Capitalism assures the worst in human nature is encouraged. Capitalism, hatred, including self-hatred, hostility, abuse, exploitation, and alienation. Wealth is created via a process that involves people selling themselves as labor, and wealth they help create via consumption, exchange, and attaining necessities for life is privatized and accumulated in the hands of a few. Technology serves existing structures of power. Tech is forced to the will of existing power structures, so we see the same results regarding, again, the consolidation of blockchain, where you have the 6 dominant blockchain companies with tens of billions of dollars in revenue and holdings dominating the market. You have, I'm looking at now the Bitcoin rich list, where you still end up with a situation where, what is this? 10,000 out of the more than 46 million wallets have over $10 million in Bitcoin in them. And the 46 million, the largest size of wallet account, 46 million at the lowest end of wallet size accounts as $1. So in other words, the wealth is still accumulating to one end of the spectrum, is the point I'm quickly trying to get to here. Black capitalism is itself mythology devised out primarily after the Second World War to convince a black community looking to rebel and engage in civil and human rights struggles that that's not the avenue, that capitalism, entrepreneurialism, business, investment is the pathway for black success. This was something specifically developed by the likes of Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon. It has a very white conservative hostile origin to it and was explicitly said, as Nixon did, we want to redefine black power as black capitalism away from the radicals like Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture. And then lastly, corrective measures to all of this must include public policy that assures redistribution of wealth that we all create, focusing again on outcomes, not opportunity. With all due respect to the geniuses in this room, no one should have to be a genius to benefit from the wealth that is created in this society. You shouldn't have to be some tech genius or business genius or academic genius or journalistic genius or some special athlete or entertainer to benefit from the wealth all of us are creating, especially when it's $20+ trillion in GDP in this country every year, and especially when there's 150 million in private wealth in this country. I'm wrong, it's 150 trillion in private wealth being generated in this country every year and 450 trillion being generated globally. We need redistribution of that and not more fantasies about literacy, financial or otherwise, or cultures of poverty, et cetera, and so forth that continue to plague black and African diaspora audiences. All right, so I will stop there. That will conclude the official part of my presentation. Now we can continue as long as you all have to discuss, debate, and otherwise. Thank you all very much. Can I go 1, 2, 3? I don't know if I got the numbering right, but red scarf? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. My name is Eva Kepler, and I'm really interested in alternative economies, and that's why I got into crypto and blockchain. One of the things, I have a million questions, but one I'll focus on is universal basic income, universal basic resource. What are your ideas around that? This is something that I think about with, using blockchain to be able to do that, or also to create maybe cooperatives. I know that was like actually, something unique Du Bois was really focused on as well. Just wanted to hear your thoughts around that in terms of a benefit for, are there myths around that as well?
Yes, I think so. So I'll start with, I just wanted to write it down so I don't forget. The last point you made, this is something that I've become increasingly focused on. In fact, this Du Boisian argument around cooperatives. And there's been a lot of discussion over the last few years around Du Bois and cooperatives, and this is not to condemn those looking to do good work. But what is often left out is that Du Bois, in his own lifetime, said it doesn't work. He said cooperatives are limited because the people, largely for the same reasons, the people involved don't have money, they don't have resources. So they're sharing what they can, but they don't have outside investment, they don't have relationships or ability to access supply lines, they don't have venture capital, they don't have policy that supports their business as opposed to someone else's. So that's why he concluded that we need socialism and ended up leaving the country and going to try to build it with Nkrumah in Ghana. So it's okay to disagree with him, but it's becoming increasingly frustrating for me. I'm not saying you're doing this, but in some academic circles and elsewhere, they cut off that part of his argument. And they leave the reader or the audience thinking that he concluded that that's the solution, and leave out his own criticism of it. Even in his lifetime, earlier, even before Du Bois reached that conclusion, as I mentioned earlier, Abram Harris had already said the same thing. That and then Brimmer came back, and Brimmer, and like, these are not revolutionaries by my standard. Brimmer, in fact, was a Harvard trained economist who worked in one or another White House administration in the 60s, I believe. I have to double check that. But his point was, these things don't work. And so his solutions may have been different from mine, but the point is they don't work. And in terms of using crypto to create any of these differences, it would again require some sort of public policy. In other words, how the technology, the currency in and of itself doesn't determine how it's used or distributed. That would have to be determined by some sort of decision people make, which for me always comes back to which is the question of what a cooperative is. Wealth is, or profit is produced, a surplus is produced, but just who gets the benefit from it. So the same thing would have to be applied to, and that's a policy decision that those involved make. So that's what would have to happen with crypto or blockchain, and that's always been an issue with me, and that's how Sinclair and I linked up and started this very interesting and odd political relationship, because I have a disagreement with him over this. And he's been fair enough to say, well, let's hear it out and let's build. And I appreciate that. And so it's not that, and the reason I come here is not because I'm saying I have a negative or hostile, condemnatory view of what you're doing here, or what you all, I think, hope to be doing here. I just disagree with the mechanism, the path. So that's all, that's my whole point. So whatever you all decide here, we'll need some sort of policy agreement if your goal is to help others or redistribute or to close collective divides. If obviously, if you're here for your individual benefit, I mean, none of what I've said has really any, I mean, you could have left an hour ago. The only reason to listen to me at all would be if you have some sort of real desire, or at least a claim that you want to be collective in your work. Again, I don't, yes, it's subjective. I mean, so what would be the objective reality then? You would have the objective reality? Is that your point? You keep using that word as if it's misunderstood. It's not misunderstood. There are moments of what I've said that are data-driven.
Basis off of what you just said.
Oh, what I just said is true. I was making a, yeah. There are elements of what I've said that have been clear, are based on data and objectivity. And there are elements, as I start off with, where I'm saying, I want to propagandize you. I'm very clear. So yeah, go ahead. Oh, wait, I think, no, I'm sorry, because he was next.
No, I came in, apologize, came in late, for the venue. I don't really understand what the conversation is about. Seems like it's more like socialism, technology, and systems. Those are what we're focusing on.
So if you don't mind, let me move to questions for those who are here, and then we can come back and build with you afterwards, or you can go check the tape. But yeah, it's a socialist critique of capitalism and the role technology plays or is said to play.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
It's nice to meet you. My name is Andre Sawyer. I'm a senior finance major attending Howard University.
Right on.
So I just want to get clarification.
Sure.
From you, because you were talking about true financial literacy.
Sure.
So you believe that what's being pushed right now is financial literacy in the sense of if you learn these type of skills, you'll be able to obtain wealth, whereas true financial literacy is peeking behind, like actually learning how the system works, seeing behind the curtain to see like how the years are turning.
I mean, you said you wanted clarity, but you seem to have it.
Okay.
So,
That
yeah.
leads into my question. Is there an individual, like, component to obtaining, I guess, wealth and success? Like, what part of that becomes, like, a person's desire to actually want to do better? And then how much of the other part is the system, which is hurting them and not allowing them to do so?
So Overwhelmingly, the issue of how much effort people put in, if we're talking about collectives, there's always going to be room for individuals of any certain community to do certain levels of individual relative well. Part of the history of black capitalism is that even before the end of official enslavement in this country, there was a black business class. There was a black business community. And as Manning Marable and others have pointed out, one of the problems that continues to plague us now is that is where some of this mythology sort of took hold, that this is a pathway for us. That there were a few people, even under the most extreme enslaved conditions, there was a couple people that in certain contexts, whether they were, were they shoemakers or, some sort of carpentry or some sort of manual labor that supported the broader slave economy, they were able to have a little business community. And relative to those in other areas, like in the field or even in the house, they were like, hey, this works. After enslavement was officially ended, this was turned into and evolved into and encouraged into a fully formed belief that business and entrepreneurial and hard work of the individual is what will be the solution. But that's just not the reality. The reality is that, again, poor people are not poor because they're lazy and don't understand the economy. In fact, most poor people, most working people work very hard. They put in a lot of effort. So sure, there are going to be examples of where you have people who push themselves and have a certain talent or a certain skill level or a certain, stick-to-itiveness that separates them, and then they may relatively attain certain levels, but then we still have a reality where you end up with people like Paris Hilton or Hunter Biden. I'm sorry?
So that's a blood issue. Is it people?
Oh, I know. So my man, but that's exactly been my point. That's been exactly my point.
It is blood.
Wait a minute, hold on, wait, just let me clarify. That's exactly my point. It's a political decision. It's a public policy issue that allows for people to inherit wealth for having done nothing.
Right.
And while other people are forced to work extremely hard for a minimal advance. So yes, just to clarify, what I'm saying is the popular use of the phrase financial literacy is part of the propaganda that is that if we teach people how to work within this economy, within this structure, within this set of ideas that I started off with are attendant to it, they'll do well. But that's part of the hustle. So I am saying real financial literacy, to truly be literate in the financial world in which we live, you have to be a student of and ultimately a critic of how capitalism as a socioeconomic order works. And that's why the first thing I said at the beginning was take a moment and reflect on how little institutional instruction any of us have been given on what is supposed to be this country's economic model. Why is that? Why are so few people actually, there's a great documentary called The Corporation, and they start off with interviewing all these famous business people, and the first thing they say is, what is a corporation? And all these people on the they're like, you know what, I don't even know how to do it. That's funny you asked me to say that. I've been running corporations, same thing with capitalism. Well, what is capitalism? Most people do not have an accurate working definition of what it is. Most people have never studied it individually or as part of their institutional instruction. So that's what I'm saying is real financial literacy. So yeah, if you do the course of study you're doing, if you get an MBA and do all these other things, the likelihood that you will be conversant and talented and do well within this structure goes up. How that benefits the rest of us, data's pretty clear, it doesn't. Black wealth is headed to zero by 2050. Thank you. So, yes, go ahead. Go ahead. You just waving me off now?
I wouldn't wave you off, but I'm just saying, it seems like you're saying financial literacy is just like you're kind of weaponizing it first. You're saying that there's no value in it. And if you did take on maybe a class or you got approached about that you couldn't find some virtue in it and growth, because there's other avenues outside of just variable accounts. You don't have just variable accounts. You do have index accounts.
Sure.
Where you can grow your money and generational wealth within the index account.
I know that's a claim. I don't think there's a reality in that. Well, there's, first of all, there,
And index accounts?
No, I'm saying, how would you grow the index?
just
How
quickly,
do you grow your index
No,
account?
let me
For your
go first.
dividends and your premium.
Right, but you have to have the capital to do so. And if you're talking about a collective of people who don't have the capital to do so, that's like saying, I'm gonna borrow,
So who doesn't
Diallo,
have it?
if I may, Diallo's point is that you're telling people who are hungry, that the only reason you're hungry because you don't know recipes. No, I'm not hungry because I don't know recipes, I'm hungry because I don't have food.
I'm not saying,
No, no, no,
you
but that's-
understand that the only reason why people are poor is, you're saying that people are not poor because they're not lazy. No one is saying that when they're offering financial literacy, they're saying there's growth in that.
no, that's absolutely not what they're saying. Financial literacy is it's popularly discussed, excuse me, it's financial literacy, is it's popularly discussed and taught. You said I'm weaponizing it. What I'm trying to share with you is that it has been weaponized by those in power against us.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to share. That they have said, use this as a tactic to get people not to raise questions about how the economy actually works and how poverty is actually created. To get them to say what you just said, that you can create generational wealth with a veritable, with an index account or this form. And that's exactly what the financial literacy mythology and message is meant to generate. So that you don't raise questions and don't say, well, no, wait a minute, how are we poor in the first place? Now, how am I supposed to actually catch up doing this? How was the wealth of those who actually have it created? They didn't start with a small business and an index account. They started with colonization, empire, military conquest, theft, violence. Then they created, as Laura Nader and Ugo Matai wrote beautifully in their book called Plunder. Then they create the rule of law, the public policy that legalizes and justifies the theft. Then they develop the technology and the means to communicate that to a mass audience and shape the public opinion. That is what I've been trying to quickly summarize today, is the process, all concluding with, let's take these formerly enslaved, colonized, most poor and oppressed people and tell them, you don't need all of that radical analysis and revolutionary, you don't need organizations, you don't need movements, you just need an index account. That's exactly my point.
So now obviously you're hyper-focusing on the index account, but that's one of many tools. I just go
Pick one.
straight to my question.
Pick any of your tools.
They weaponize finance. What would you say is the difference between a weapon and a tool?
Who holds it, and who is consciously using it, and with what power and legal justification.
The hand that wields it.
Right, and that's why the core component, or at least a component of what my presentation was saying, was technology doesn't change those relationships. So a new tool, a new technology doesn't change those power relationships. It gives the powerful another tool to use.
What communication does.
Right, but again,
And the technology is the tools that we utilize to communicate
all
values.
right, go ahead.
I had another question before.
It's all good.
But I'm just, to the point that you're making and to what you two on the table seem to be referencing into about fintech as a tool. The perfect example is Robinhood. Yes, you get to now do fractional stock buys, right? That didn't start with Robinhood. And then when the market does certain things, they have the tech and they have the policy of how the company operates to not allow the end user, the everyday person, to beat the house. We saw that with the Wall Street Bros. They literally turned off the system and said, no, you can't do this, which goes to your point about who controls the back end of the technology and what are they allowing the end user to do.
I think you raise a very good point and a good example. I was going to take it even a more focused and more narrow version of your argument, which is what happened with Killer Mike and the Greenwood Bank app. It was promoted communicatively as a financial literacy solution to black inequality and was promoted to black people as a bank. It's literally a fintech operation, a go-between with a white bank backing it. So all it was a black storefront that took black money, put it in a white bank, and allowed that white bank to do what it does with people's investments and deposits. That's in many ways a perfect summary of the argument I'm trying to make here. You take the pre-existing relationship between black people in this country, you take new technology, new claims, and regurgitate old mythologies and new claims, promote it under a new, hot new style, and the same relationship still exists. Black money is exploited, extracted from the community, and ends up in the hands of the handful of whites that have the dominant accumulated wealth of it anyway. So,
Qualitative easing.
I'm sorry?
It's called qualitative easing, quantitative easing, and qualitative easing. And that's where financial literacy, see, if we're gonna talk about blockchain, it's important for us to talk
Wait a minute. What does what I just said have to do with what you're saying here? That's
the term.
No.
Everything that you just said.
Right, 'cause you just.
Wait a minute.
that's the process.
Quantitative ease. Wait a minute. That's not even accurate. You're not even. Wait a minute. That's not even accurate. Even in your own context. Quantitative easing is not taking black money and putting it in white banks. That's just black money going into white banks. That's just old. You don't need that. You don't.
Quantitative easing when a bank gives another.
That's inflation.
Hold on, but even if that was correct, so we're saying you have a term for it.
Okay, but you have a term for it. What's the difference? The exploitive relationship still happens.
So if I know it's called quantitative easing, how does that get me out of my situation?
Because, like I was saying before I was interrupted by the man with the microphone,
Oh.
is what I was saying.
You mean the man invited to be here to speak at this time?
Right.
Go ahead,
Oh, okay,
go
my
ahead, go ahead,
fault.
brother.
So not just any man with a microphone. In fact it does empower me. I was invited to speak here. Is that not empowering?
I'm happy that you feel empowered.
Do you feel empowered to be able to interrupt it? Does that empower you? Do you feel better?
Can we be respectful?
I think we should all have respect
Can
for
we be
each other.
respectful in the room? This is
Am
not
I not being respectful?
No, you're not.
Because the man with the mic is talking over me and I just called it out.
I need you to tone it back.
This is monopolizing the
This
conversation.
is a this is.
I'm monopolizing the conversation.
I need you to tone it back.
We're just allowed to hear your point.
Did you have your hand up? I think a bit behind you in the orange.
To everyone that I monopolized your guys' conversation.
Oh my goodness.
I'll excuse myself.
So my question is, what to you is an example of a successful model for progress that we could look to or aspire to within the current context?
It's a good question. I think there are, honestly, where I think we've been at the height of is at the most militant and aggressively interruptive moments. In other words, when there have been anything from, I would include even the so-called mainstream civil rights efforts to certainly the Black Power militancy era, it's the disruption that I think is where we are at our most hopeful. Because in that disruption was a lot of the debate. I mentioned it, I didn't really get to it today, but in those moments, there was this huge debate over just this topic that has been largely erased from the historical consciousness of certainly the students that end up in my classroom. In other words, it was the sort of clashes in the street, the more overt radical politics that not only awakened a certain consciousness in black communities, but necessitated the change that we're currently suffering. So it was really what we're suffering even in this conversation is part of the counterintelligence program backlash that suppressed those radical movements and replaced those histories and narratives with ones that are dominant in today's. So that would be, for me, the moment I would want us to recreate as much as possible. And Dr. King was evoked earlier. One of his main criticisms at the end of his life, which has also been largely erased, including from the monuments that claim to represent him here in this city, is that he was an enormous critic of the black bourgeoisie and the white liberal. He said to the black bourgeoisie, you all are running off with the work that we've done. You're taking the handful of advantages. This is because he was a Du Boisian. Remember, Du Bois is the talented 10th, but then he came back with the guiding 100th and said, I didn't want you just to sell out and become a dentist and a business person and run off to your nice house. So maybe we need a smaller 100th of the community that will take advantage of what they can do and bring it back as resource to the rest of us. That's the politic I think we need to get back to, that those of us who do have relative benefit, I mean, my life is really, relatively speaking, pretty simple. So then the point is, what do I do to help bring resources back to those who don't have access? Because I'm benefiting from that sliver of a window that was opened by a whole bunch of people struggling and fighting, and by a system that said, okay, you know what? If they're going to do this, we got to come up with another solution. If we got to have a few more black elected officials, a couple of black celebrities, even a black billionaire or two, let's do it. Because the collective is going to do worse financially and be less critical. That was all a response to the efforts of those times, and that's what I'm never happy with my answers to these kinds of questions, but that would be.
Well, it sounds like part of it is, what you're saying is that we have to redefine what we consider to be the goal of success.
I agree, that's a good point. Redefine the state, that's what my point, that's why I want, a lot of my work had been around the buying power concept, and I want black people to stop focusing on this 1.8 trillion fantasy that doesn't exist and focus on the real 20 plus trillion that's generated every year in this country for those who own the economy. That's what I want. I do want us to say that's my point. I love the genius, the young genius in here in particular. I'm not saying don't work hard and give. I'm not saying any of that. And I'm not saying don't look to be rewarded for your efforts. What I'm saying is that shouldn't be necessary. The outcomes are already generated. I want us to focus on those outcomes. I want us to say, I don't want this mythology of opportunity. I don't need any more opportunity. What I want is the wealth is already there. Let's spread it around a little bit.
In defining it, I mean, a lot of people don't know.
Fair enough.
Martin Luther King generated millions of dollars for himself in his lifetime, and he didn't use it for himself.
Correct.
And that's not what he's known for. That's not why he was successful. So
That's correct.
So that is a different model.
Look, my late great, I did have the privilege of going to the Africana Studies and Research Center when it was still being directed by its founding director, the late great Dr. James Turner. And one of the things he used to say to us that I've probably unconsciously tried to not focus on for selfish reasons, but he used to say, the goal isn't can you make 100,000 a year. The goal is can you make 100,000 but live off of 30. He said in our generation, meaning his older generation, the mistake he felt that they made was that we focused on just the ideas of redistribution. He said, no, I'm not mad at people generating money, but the point is what is done with that money.
Right.
And that's the part I definitely do not give up 70% of my earnings to the struggle. So I should be, judged negatively for that. But I think that's the kind of standard that we should be thinking about, because the only hope that we really have is not in catching up materially, financially. The only hope we really have is in the collective movement ability to impose the necessity on this society that it must change. That's really it. Otherwise, again, that's why I said a few minutes ago, if your goal is if really you're only thinking about you and your immediate family, I'm not mad at that, but then there's really no value and there's no point in wasting your time listening to me. Because we can all pretty much do a version of that. If the goal is something else, then I think we do have to engage these kinds of difficult conversations. And I even kind of wish the brother didn't leave. I appreciate that there was a desire in the room for him to, fall in line a little bit. But we got to start. And everywhere I go, something like that happens every single time. I understand. I'm walking into a difficult space in many cases, and I'm offering ideas that we often don't get to hear. So I'm not mad at the initial reaction. I think we have to go through that. We have to be willing to go through that, because otherwise, Daruba bin Wahad said it's not looking good for the home team. Yes, sir.
Well, how does your thought process in your presentation and overall idea fit into a blockchain or a fintech framework?
Simply, and I was talking earlier about this what I think is a funny relationship I've evolved with Sinclair, is that he's arguing this is a project that will help the collective of black humanity. You disagree with him on that? Or you disagree that he's saying that, or you disagree with that?
I disagree with the idea, the premise.
But you understand that's his idea. I disagree with it too.
I understand. I disagree with yours as well.
Okay, fair enough. But we agreed that that's what he's saying.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I'm a sucker for that. If you tell me my interest is in the collective, even if I disagree with you, I'm a sucker for it. I'm in. That's all you got to do is tell me, Jared, I want to do something for the people. Let's have a talk. I'm in. You're going to get me. Again, we disagree. So my point is that blockchain and crypto cannot be used to change existing relationships any more than any other technology or currency could be used in and of itself to change those relationships. That's the simple, that's been the simple summary of my approach this morning. Because I don't think he's spoken yet, so.
Good question.
Sure.
To piggyback off of that, do you think that if the education on blockchain technology was provided to us, I guess at the same time as our counterparts, would your idea change?
Well, I think,
Because I think that's the real problem. I think we're just always late to the party, and we're also
well, it's not that I don't, I hear that argument a lot when it comes to new technology. It's not that or current, whatever, or innovation. It's not that we're late to the party, it's that we're permanently locked out of benefiting or accessing the party. Or we're permanently locked into a relationship where we're the servants at the party.
Well, this is the first time that we're not.
I disagree. So that's a fundamental disagreement. Because to me, Bitcoin and blockchain has always been a mythologized space that has already been accumulated, already been consolidated, and it needed new investors to get involved to repeat the Ponzi. That's been, so, but what I would say is that with anything, whether it's blockchain or anything, political education has to be part of it. So there has to be some sort of component that is saying, look, these are our clear political and ideological goals. Now, how do we apply those to this? What is usually happening is we have some vague idea about progress that is based on, again, a white capitalist logic that we then say, now I can get in on the ground floor and do this with this new technology. And that's not, I just don't think, I think history is very clear that that is not a solution. And then even some of the research I pointed to today, admittedly quickly and a bit rushed, shows that that's the reality. There's no space to get into. That's why Hill Harper was going around telling black audiences to buy Satoshis, right? What is that, 1 millionth of a 1 millionth or something, right? Because he's saying the Bitcoin itself is already bought and sold. It's already owned. So the only way for you to get in is to buy a little sliver of it in the hopes that it will accrue in value and that your value attached to it will grow. That's part of the mythology. I mean, that doesn't close the gap. That doesn't transfer the ownership, and it definitely doesn't transfer the wealth or redistribute the wealth created from that ownership or transaction. So that's why I'm saying we need to look at the outcomes. Be like, look, you want to have blockchain and crypto? Boom, have it. Oh, X% of wealth was created, X% got to come over here. That should be it. Now, then if you want to study and get into it and learn it and do all that, great. But that shouldn't be a necessity for a community to survive. Because even if I don't know anything about blockchain, the society that allows for it to be evolved, for the technology to develop, for the ideas to develop, I have already contributed to. And then if I use it to transact, I'm definitely contributing to whatever comes out of that. So we should all benefit. I think he was, okay. Let me get him and then we'll go, okay. Oh wait, you had your hand up too? Oh, my fault. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I'm taking the premise that you had and applying it to blockchain, crypto at all, okay? Just the idea, the fundamental understanding of it, okay? Now, I have a background in IT and engineering, and still this concept of distributed nodes, and I don't know if I'm gonna get into that during this session.
Not today, not me, no. That's above my pay grade.
Well, you look at our common financial systems, and they're controlled by, Chase and all of that, okay? And when I read a lot about crypto, it talks about how it's gonna be centralized. I'm sorry.
Decentralized.
Thank you. Decentralized. You're gonna have, quote unquote, these decentralized nodes. What does that mean? Does that mean Is it gonna, and I'm not asking you.
Yeah, don't ask me. I can answer a part of that, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Is it gonna be a cottage industry, or are we gonna have these decentralized nodes of Microsoft and Amazon and, you know?
Now that's the decentralization that they would want, because that allows them to, on the one hand, well, I shouldn't say it that way. That allows for the lack of regulation that they want. They would want the ability to get in, dominate the market, and then be unregulated, so nobody looks into what they're doing and look how they're ripping everybody off. But my point is that my approach to the blockchain isn't in terms of the specifics of these nodes, but it is in the specifics of the companies that dominate control of it and that dominate access to it via the crypto exchanges. All of that has already become centralized. It's already the dominant Binance company in the world that is the dominant biggest. There's already the smaller. There's already the 1, 2, 3. We already have all of that. And then when you look at the wallets, even if you can't identify the person per se, which they can, really people can, you already see that in a handful of wallets is all the Bitcoin.
Right, and that's what worries me. And without getting into the food fight that has to
Yeah.
One gentleman mentioned
Quantitative easing and qualitative
And
easing.
my understanding of that was, when we had the financial crisis in 08, quantitative easing was just another way of saying, well, we got all these junk loans and we're gonna package them up and sort of write them off. But they came up with the term quantitative easing. It's just enough to put a, pretty face on that.
I've always understood it in terms of inflation and how much money they let circulate to regulate the value of what money is in circulation. The point I was trying to make with the brother, though, is that and my comment in the back was it doesn't matter what you call it. I think we disagree on the terminology, but it doesn't matter. The fact is the relationship stays the same. A black fronting business with Andy Young, the old civil rights, and Killer Mike, the new civil rights, and the business brother in between, go into the black community and tell you, give your money to me. We're gonna start the Greenwood Bank Initiative, rebuild Black Wall Street with fintech. And everybody a lot of people got excited, and then you look up at you lift the curtain a little bit and you see, oh, it's not a bank. And the bank involved is a white bank in California.
Right, but the terminology is in the sense that, you are calling it something else. Like years ago, it was like, oh yeah, affirmative action, we can't have affirmative action and this and that. Now they got this DEI
And what they
some congressman said, well, Kamala Harris is just a DEI hire, whereas years ago he would have said she
Affirmative action hire,
The
right.
idea is that, to me anyway, okay, DEI is less, less defined. I still have to look it up. And so the other point I'm making is that terms matter only in that sense to confuse and upset.
That's exactly. So that's why, and all I was trying to say is that the relationship doesn't change, and that's what you just identified. Call it affirmative action or DEI. The relationship doesn't change. They're still going to point to her as undeserving, and I would still point to her as being a false manipulation of race and gender consciousness to lead us back to a party that's not going to do anything for us and is currently leading a genocide. But that's a whole other discussion. But the point is you're right, and I agree with you that the terminology is secondary to understanding the process that terminology is representing, which is what I'm trying to say is real financial literacy. And the popular version of financial literacy is to just get you to accept my definition, my worldview, and ultimately your own culpability or blame for being poor. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you haven't said.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious about here in the U.S.
Mhm.
I'm assuming are recent. We've never really seen any big waves of redistributive policy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of like even people who say like I'm a socialist, in my mind I'm like, are you really a socialist? Because it's such a wild variation from everything you've grown up with.
Oh, I see. Can you really be one?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I'm also like, on the policy aspect, if anything
You mean in a socialist economy, wouldn't we be?
Yeah.
No, okay, so this is, okay, we definitely don't have time for the full discussion here. So, by the way, please sign up for our Black Liberation Media collective effort on YouTube. I have a show called I Mix What I Like. We have a broader collaborative collective that deal with all these issues daily. So for ongoing beyond that, please sign up. But the short answer is that part of what I'm hearing and what you said is part of the narrative creation that I was talking about earlier. That when you hear socialism, you think, oh, they're going to take everything from us, and it's going to be controlled, and it's going to be this over-dominant, and that's in some ways what's already happening. And in what I'm saying is no, the socialism aspect of it is the redistribution. So it would be, yeah, if you're paying even more taxes, but your home and school and healthcare is free, if you have paid vacations and you have 20-hour work weeks, and then I think that's where we start to have, that's where the more rational, logical, and functional reality of socialism starts to kick in, I think. So part of it is that narrative that has been developed with intention. I talk about all the, again, the reason they put in our Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, was put in the 50s after the Second World War, specifically to train young people to think of God associated with capitalism and democracy. So when you grow up and you hear somebody say, man, Dr. Ball is just a godless communist, you don't have to study anything. You could just say, and we know Africans don't do no God. So you tell Africans it's got something to do with no God, and they're, So you gotta, you put that in there, it's baked in. So that's all that, and there was one other part of what you were saying that I meant to.
Like, can we really conceptualize socialism from like?
Yes, if you study socialism, there's a great book I've been recommending called Socialist Reconstruction, which actually talks about how we would move very easily from where we are today, maybe not easily, with some struggle, but where we would move from, reorganizing this society to do something very different. And I think it's an exciting read and something to at least consider. But again, not specific to you or what you're saying, but to all of us. This is why I keep coming back to where I started. To what extent have any of us been encouraged or taught any of this? We've never been taught institutionally how capitalism works. We've never been taught how a socialist economy would work. We've never been given anything other than a handful of movies and documentary lines here or there. We get a whole bunch of negative propaganda, and we move on. So that's why in the short time I know that we have left, I just want to reiterate that point, and because I don't want to leave it to my failure to properly explain it quickly. And that, so please don't take my bad answer as it can't be answered properly. And the same thing I would say if you didn't agree or agree, don't take my word for it. We gotta enhance the study of it. But yeah. Yeah, go ahead. You haven't said anything yet.
So, I had a question, but one thing that you made very clear, like the concept of the whole blockchain ecosystem is just being an extension of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
You made that very clear. And like how you mentioned how majority of the public traded Bitcoin acquired or mined Bitcoin is only held by like 10% or less.
Something like that, yeah.
So for us in the space that are in the space or trying to enter the ecosystem, how can public policy here in the U.S. or on the continent of Africa be a part of that, aiding or providing guidelines? Because the one thing that you made very clear was policy is our way to more or less freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we, our minds come together, whether here or on the continent, to be able to influence in a direction that is going to be helpful to our community?
That's a great question, and again, that's why I think we have to be involved in various forms of political activity, organizational work, movement work. We have to have that political education component to whatever our interests are. If you're doing blockchain, I'm doing teaching. We still have to be in these other spaces because I need policy to help my industry as much as you would do yours. The specifics of it, I struggle with. For instance, a few years ago, I remember in New York City, there was an attempt to say, let's put it like a half a penny tax on every trade, something like that. I don't, like, it sounds so easy. It sounds like it should be not that controversial. So like that would be something I would say, like, if, okay, fine, you want to do blockchain and transact on the blockchain and all that, let's have a policy that says if you transact, I don't know how this would work because I know there's a lot of anonymity and it's not always easy to determine what country someone's in or whatever, but to say if you're using this blockchain, you're going to pay a tax, and it may only be a half of a penny per I don't know, a half a, and that tax would go and be used to what they say they're going to do when they build a football stadium, and they never do. Or we're going to build your schools and do all that. It would have to start with. But beyond that, usually the what's the word I'm looking for? The escape route that I use in these moments is to just simply say, the more you're asking that question, the more likely those answers will evolve, even if I can't give you a good one right now. But that's where I want more people using their genius to think about that, instead of it being solely focused on how is this going to make me money, and then how me making money somehow translates to it benefiting my community. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I missed the first half, so sorry. It sounds like you're talking about socialism and capitalism. So, you say it's not taught. I wonder if the federal government, I think of the federal government as being socialistic in a way, after the Civil War, Reconstruction, and so on. And I work for the patent system. I'm a patent attorney, and so I look at the patent system as being a combination of socialism and capitalism. And
Interesting.
The sharing of ideas, the sharing of technology to benefit society, but you can also you have a short monopoly to capitalize on your ideas. So can you have them both together and they work together?
I don't hear them as working together. What I would hear is taking what are considered to be the best aspects of capitalism, which is this individualism, this encouragement to develop and benefit from your development, and then matching that with some sort of more redistributive effort. I just lost what I was going to say. You started off, you said socialism, capitalism, patents.
It's the patent system of examples of them working together.
Oh, what I was going to say is that, yes, the elite, as many have pointed out, are socialistic amongst themselves. And we saw, I think, an even better, more recent example is during the pandemic, where when everybody was staying home, fewer people were shopping, fewer consumption was occurring, the economy started to collapse. Which is my point earlier about if you got to keep it circulating. If people aren't shopping, if they're not going to the store and buying that overpriced latte and then buying, remember when everybody's telling black people don't buy hair and rims and you're spending too much on tennis shoes? That's all nonsense. If everybody stopped doing that, the economy would slow and be disturbed. Never mind the people at the hair salon lose their job. The people who sell you the shoes and work in the Foot Locker, they lose their job. So the point isn't don't shop. The point is when you spend the money, something better should happen for all of us with that transaction. So we saw it happen during the pandemic where the elite said, oh my God, they're not shopping. They're stuck in the house. They're not going anywhere. We're losing money. So what they do? A couple keystrokes, trillions of dollars appeared in people's accounts. They spread some money to some poor people and then blamed them for the PPP loan destruction of the economy when it was the rich had all this money that they weren't using and investing. So yeah, they're very socialistic when they need to be. And then the more I look at even modern monetary theory, there's people who are not revolutionaries per se, but who are arguing that in this country, all of this has been fugazied up. And that it would be way easy to create a redistributive situation based on what this country can produce both productively and financially. So again, that's why I keep coming back to why do we have to be, it's like a version of that old Chris Rock joke where he said in that fancy neighborhood, the black person who's living there has to be like the best this and the best that and the most this and the most that. And then Jay-Z and Beyonce, and then next door is this dentist. No disrespect to dentistry, but just like a regular white guy. They get to be regular and live in that same neighborhood, but black people have to be extraordinary. And then we hear the same thing financially. Be extraordinary in your business and financial development and investment capability. Be miraculous in your hard work, and then maybe you can. And meanwhile, over here, Elon Musk just fell into money, fell into stolen IP, fell into stolen claims, fell into an Azanian South African colonial experience that he benefited from. He's no genius.
That's 4 felons already.
Well, we already know felony counts and genius are not, so that's why I'm saying, like, the people who have all this wealth, many of whose names we don't even know, even when you went back before he died, I was looking at when Charlie Munger was talking about his early development with Warren Buffett. And he's talking about investment this, and you got to be a G. And even to his white audience, he's telling them, oh yeah, but I had this early relationship with them. I think my father owned the store that he worked for, and then Buffett brought me in, and we started doing it. And it's like, well, wait a minute. How am I supposed to do it? I don't live next to Warren Buffett. My father didn't own a grocery store. We're asked to, and then we turn on black podcasts, and they'll bring people like Steve Harvey and someone else out there to say, man, you got to be smarter with your money. But Steve, how did you get your money? Sleeping in cars, comedy routines, Family Feud, a couple TV shows, this, that, and the third. But then you come before a black audience and say, no, but you need to be financially literate and invest properly if you want to get where I'm at. Wait a minute. That's not how your wealth was created. Your wealth wasn't created by you doing what you're telling me to do. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to comment on that. So do you think that we should force ourselves into circumstances and predicaments like he did? His path was unconventional.
No, I'm not saying you should try to become a comedian and be homeless and no, what I'm saying is if you become rich by that path, don't then go to poor black people and tell them to do something else. Be more honest and be like, look, I have a very rare experience. You most likely are not going to be able to do what I did. There's a whole bunch of people out there with stand-up mics, and they don't get where I'm at. There's only one host of Family Feud. Instead of doing that and working for something that says my success should not negatively harm you, and if it's going to benefit you, it should be through either taxation or I don't really know. I mean, we could come up with that, but that's really the point I'm trying to get. And the white version is the same thing: be financially literate. But that's not what you did. You came over here and wiped people out and stole everything and set up rules of laws and did all this, and then you hand down investment and privilege and opportunity and head starts and advantages that nobody else has, and then you tell the other people to be financially literate and responsible. I used to show in my classes all the time these 2 great documentaries from Jamie Johnson, who inherited the wealth from the Johnson & Johnson Foundation. Born Rich and The 1%. And the best part of it is you watch them. They tell you on camera themselves. I'm turning 21 at midnight, and I'm about to be handed billions of dollars. What? Yeah, the president of Brown University wanted to kick me out because I wasn't going to class, but my father bought him a building, so I'm laughing at him when he comes, he just greets me at the lunch table knowing I never go to class. Like, they're all up there, they're all over the place. They're telling you, we didn't do a damn thing. Not a damn thing. But you can catch up to me if you're financially literate. Start a small business, circulate your dollar, get some Bitcoin. Watch this podcast, and better yet, invest in my course. I love these people to tell you I'm the best investor. But sign up for my course. If you're really the best investor, you don't need me to sign up for your course. You're not really going to tell me what you did. Yes, sir.
Well, so it seems like to me, what you're saying, of course, is that the true socialism is in the education. It's in the sharing of the knowledge and teaching people.
No, I'm saying true socialism is socialism. Nationalization of the economy, redistribution, democratic redistribution of the wealth. That's real socialism.
Yeah.
What I'm to the sister's question, this is part of the question the sister I didn't answer earlier, is that part of what I'm doing here as a wannabe socialist living in a capitalist society is I'm trying to advocate the ideas. And that's why part of my presentation was saying I'm an adherent to a socioeconomic order that requires me to be an adherent to a certain set of ideas. And that's the same for anybody else. I'm just being upfront with it. If you're a capitalist, that means you are accepting a certain worldview and set of ideas, and I'm trying to challenge those ideas. So that's yeah, go ahead. And what time do we have to get out of here? Because I feel like,
It's not lunch yet, but let me check.
all right, because I'm, about 10 minutes? Cool with me. Go ahead, you haven't said anything yet.
Yeah, I just had a quick question, because I know you were saying, like, with Steve Harvey, for example, like, he made his money through, like, an unconventional method. And, like, growing up, what I've been taught is, in order to be successful, you have to, like, a luck is a big part of it, like, luck and preparedness. So for those people who, like, kind of got, I don't even want to say lucky, but, like, have those unconventional routes, like, now you're ready to be a football player, now you're ready to be a rapper, now you're ready to be Steve Harvey. Like, what should they tell us, if they aren't?
But you saying, aren't you a Howard University student? So you part of them. Seriously, we are part of them. We who get to go to the university and have the privilege of taking classes and teaching classes, we're having that rare experience. That's rare.
We are, but at the same time, like, I'm a finance student.
Yeah.
They're telling me all the financial literacy stuff, couldn't save my money.
Right.
You know, all this stuff. So, like, if it's not that, then what is it?
If the financial literacy isn't the solution, what is?
Right. Revolution.
Yeah, in short, we need some sort of political movement. That's why I keep coming back to. I don't have the exact clear answer other than we need some sort of political movement that doesn't require all of this for us to benefit from the society we're already creating.
But keep doing
So-
what you're doing, still.
Definitely keep, no, yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, I have a job. I teach at the university. I did all the classes, wrote all the papers, did all the things. I'm not telling anybody to quit and see you out in the streets in 5 minutes. I'm not doing that. No. What I would be asking you to do practically is do your course of study, get straight A's, be respectful to these wonderful professors that you have. And in the privilege, that was really the point that I'm getting at. You still are privileged to be to have sort of built into your life the ability to take time to think, to study, to reflect on all of these issues and how they impact yourself and your community. So then maybe take a few minutes. I would maybe see, you got wonderful libraries, you got a wonderful digital environment, you got some decent faculty on this campus. Investigate some alternative ideas and see what that does for your work. But definitely, my daughter's at the university. She's at University of Maryland. I'm not telling her to quit and run out into the. No. I'm not saying any of that. But in addition to that, join a political organization, support Black liberation media, expand your media diet, develop a study circle, read some things that are not on your syllabus. That would be my humble, and there the answers will come. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you think that's part of our issue too, though? Because we want revolution, but we want to maintain and we want to stay.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
At the same time.
No doubt.
Like you said, you're not telling me to email my boss.
No doubt.
Tell him I quit.
Right.
But at the same time, we all see that revolution is needed, but we try to maintain and stay comfortable.
No question. My daughter said that the new line she got is, "There's a war behind you." And it does, it feels good. When I'm walking outside, she's like, "There's a war behind you, Pops." I'm like, "Oh, word. Yeah." I'm like, "Yeah." That's what I need, the war behind and with me to make that work. All right. So we good? So listen, it's been an honor, been a pleasure. I hope we can build some more on and off these records. And as always, peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you later. Thank you very much. It's been great.